Today, by popular request, it's Mr. Irreducible Complexity himself, Mike Behe. As you may know, Mike Behe is an actual working scientist who also collaborates with creationist organizations like the Discovery Institute in order to lie about the science of the field that he actually works in order to promote the religion he thinks is more true than actual facts. Which leads to some very interesting conflicts of interest. Today, we'll be looking at a series of short videos that the Discovery Institute produced called Secrets of the Cell. These are short episodes, so we're going to take a look at a couple of them. Now, we're going to get right into it, but if you're new here, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We're getting really, really close to being able to activate the toolkit that YouTube keeps locked behind that 1,000 subscriber barrier. And I'm getting super excited for custom emojis and membership badges and the ability to redirect live streams and all kinds of things that I don't even know what's behind that wall. So, if you know someone who would be interested in this kind of content, please do share, because every single click helps get us there, and I greatly appreciate it. Now, with all that said, let us delve into the secrets of the cell.
Machines. They enable us to be creative and produce spectacular structures. We also find magnificent structures in nature, and each of these living structures was also built by machines. Machines that are far more elaborate than anything that humans have ever built.
First of all, I have to acknowledge this is amazing footage. This is really cool stuff. But to produce high-quality video requires a high-quality budget. It's important to keep in mind that the Discovery Institute has the kind of money to pour into this sort of thing, and they make that money by lying to people about science. So just keep in mind, there's a motive behind all of this. Second, it's probably a minor quibble, but I do want to point out, biological machines and mechanical machines aren't exactly the same thing, because the mechanical machines are created artificially by intelligent designers. So it's not a strict analog. Biological machinery, you can call it a machine, but does that make it a machine? Because it begs that question. Well, then there must be a creator, because machines are created. It's a little misleading right off the get-go.
In fact, this log is currently being decomposed by tiny fungi that are vastly more complex than this drone. I'm Mike Behe. Welcome to the unseen world of organic micro-machines.
I have to pause again because I don't know if Mike has ever said this, but it is a very common refrain among creationists and intelligent design advocates that all the evolutionists can ever show us are cartoons and CGI. And here we are looking at a CGI cartoon. Also, it looks like pretty good CGI, which again requires a pretty big budget.
Every living thing in the world is made of cells.
That's sort of a tautology, in that in order to meet our definition of living, it has to be made of cells. We don't consider viruses to be alive, in part because they are not cells. So yes, by definition, every living thing is made of cells. That's our definition, though.
Microbes are single-celled organisms. Advanced life forms have trillions of cells. Inside a cell is a bustling operation of interconnected molecular machinery so sophisticated it would put any modern high-tech factory to shame. This intricate machinery is what gives the cell its remarkable abilities to process energy, execute genetic instructions, and replicate, all with unbelievable efficiency.
The particular protein being shown, it's reading a strand of DNA, apparently, and maybe it's replicating another strand, maybe it's constructing a protein. We're not really shown what's going on, but it's leaving out some very important stuff. For instance, the protein itself is not it's not making that matter exist. That matter has to be fed in on the front end for it to be assembled in the right order, it has to be done in the right way. There's a whole vestige of other processes going on that aren't being shown, partly because it would make the view messy, but also partly because it would undermine Behe's claim that it's incredibly efficient. Because oftentimes biological processes are the opposite of efficient. They work barely, and with no regard for efficiency whatsoever. Now, of course, there is a survival advantage to better efficiency, but if you're sitting on the fence between working and not working, working is good enough for evolution's purposes because there's no intelligence guiding it.
I'm a biochemist, a scientist who studies the molecules of life. There's never been a more exciting time to be a life scientist. This is a golden age of discovery in molecular biology. Stunning breakthroughs in our understanding of the most fundamental unit of life, the cell, have been coming faster and faster.
It's true. It's a fascinating time, and not just in cellular biology, but in all the sciences. We're making discoveries faster and faster, and it's super exciting. It makes me really, really thrilled for what might be coming tomorrow. What will we learn 10 years from now? It's incredible. However, there's that tautology again. The cell, the most fundamental unit of life, because that's how we defined it.
My own view of the cell took a turn years ago. I was in a lab at the National Institutes of Health doing postdoctoral research. I was discussing the origin of life with a fellow postdoc. As she and I thought about the cell, we wondered, how could its complex membrane, proteins, metabolism, genetic code, how could all that have formed by the accumulation of undirected changes? So we were both sort of stunned by the notion, but then we just laughed it off. We figured that even if we didn't know the answer, somebody must know.
Do I sense an argument from incredulity coming on? Oh, if science hasn't discovered the answer, the entire answer, every last detail, then it must be my made-up thing. My invisible friend did it. Obviously, humans haven't discovered everything about everything yet. We're still working on it because, as our friend from Shameless Popery pointed out, in order to read the book of the universe, it has to be both legible, and we have to know how to read that language. We don't know how to read that language. It was not programmed into us by a creator, so we're deciphering it as we go. And the fact that we haven't yet finished deciphering the entire book doesn't mean any old made-up nonsense is just as good an explanation.
Well, in the 10 years after that, I didn't come across any science publications that adequately answered the nagging question.
I personally haven't seen it, therefore, no one has any clue, and my invisible friend is a better answer.
Exactly how did the cell get to be so complex?
What? We can see less complex cells. We can see incremental changes between species, and along the lines of evolution, we can see differences in the past. We can see incremental changes occurring before our eyes in laboratories. They're incremental, but we're dealing with tremendous timescales. It would be insanity to say that the incremental changes we continue to observe today only started recently and everything had to be created from a near two-day point by some magic action or miracle. No, of course not. It makes much more sense that the incremental changes we observe today have always been happening. And so if you go back in time, iteration after iteration will be less complex. We see this in things that we make ourselves, and I'll probably get into this a little bit more later on. Look at cars, okay? Cars today have Air conditioning and heated seats and power windows and power steering. Wow, it's so complex. How could it possibly have gotten that way by incremental changes? Well, it simply couldn't. It wouldn't work, would it? And yet we can look back at older models of all the cars and see when air conditioning was added, when heated seats were added, when power windows were added, seat belts, etc., all the systems. These are things that we know for sure were intelligently designed, and yet we can see an incremental iterative process bringing them to their current configuration. Why on earth would something naturally developing not follow the same procedure?
Everything I read presumed that those biological mysteries would eventually be solved by Darwin's theory of evolution.
It's not really a presumption. Many of the mysteries have been solved by applying principles of evolution. Not necessarily Darwin's version, but any of the other flavors as well. More to the point, evolution, while it hasn't answered everything, has answered a lot of things and has not steered us wrong yet. Not once.
Being an evolutionist myself, that was fine with me. Then I came across a book titled Evolution, A Theory in Crisis by a geneticist, Michael Denton.
For clarity, Denton is also a researcher at the Discovery Institute. He is a vested creationist.
It addressed profound problems with Darwin's theory. It asked hard questions about the origins of life.
Another point of order, origins of life is a separate question from evolution, much like where did the cosmic singularity come from is a separate question from how did the cosmos develop following the Big Bang.
And it showed that science didn't have the answers.
Yet, there are things we know today that we did not know 100 years ago. That doesn't mean someone 100 years ago would be justified in saying, oh, well, science hasn't answered how powered flight works, therefore it's worthless and we should just trust in my invisible friend.
No matter that everyone assumed it did, or assumed that it would eventually, or something.
Or something. Misleading language, for shame.
I was flabbergasted by the book. I began to look at biology with a fresh set of eyes, and I started asking questions.
You weren't asking questions before. What kind of scientist doesn't ask questions precisely?
Lots of questions.
I should hope
That's
so.
what this series is about, asking questions.
Oh, I'm just asking questions.
Not about the why or when, but about the how of biological origins.
Okay, so we're going to talk biological origins. That's fine. But don't you dare conflate that with evolution or modern biological processes, Mr. Behe.
As I said, there's never been a more exciting and fun time to be a biologist. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into this series, and I hope you'll join me.
Okay, so that's the introduction episode, and I gotta say, that is some killer footage. Also, a drone like that, kind of expensive. Once again, with the funding. I mean, a drone that you can fly in the forest, that won't immediately crash into a tree or a branch. It's not just a high-quality drone with a high-quality camera. It also has enough collision sensors and enough AI piloting skill to not crash into the many branches and undergrowths and things. And those cost a pretty penny. So yeah, Discovery Institute has some cash, and they put some cash into this series. That's the introductory episode. Obviously, it was fairly brief. Most of the first several are very brief, and we're going to cover more than one per show, because why wouldn't we? So yeah, let's go on to the next episode and see what Michael Behe has to present to us. We
all love cars for their beauty and performance. But except for guys like these, not everyone really understands what's inside.
Oh, we're building into incredulity already. Also, point of order, I'm not really a car person, so it's not really fair to say everyone is into cars for their beauty and performance or whatever, because even if it's just me, it's not everyone.
Is this what you're looking for?
Not even close. You could stand over there.
Oh, okay, I'll just stand over here.
What was the point of that?
In a way, cell biologists are like auto mechanics. Each cell has an astonishing number of intricate parts, way more than any car. We study what the parts are, how the parts work together, and even which parts of the cell can be left out without causing too much harm.
Mr. Irreducible Complexity is going to tell us about parts that can be taken out without diminishing function.
If you understand the inner workings of the cell, you can understand a lot about all living things. What makes them thrive, what makes them fail, and what causes them to evolve. We'll cover more about that later.
Okay, so at least he's on board with the fact evolution exists. So at least there's some common ground for a starting point.
Right now, I want to look at the topic of complexity. You and I are made of about 40 trillion cells. They comprise every part of our complex human anatomy.
Well, I won't get into nitpicking at this point.
But the truth is that we can reduce the number of parts and still have function. If we lost an eye, an ear, or a hand, it would be very unfortunate, but our lives could go on. The same applies to this rather complex drill. It has some cool add-ons, but I could take off this battery gauge, or this LED light, or a few other gadgets, and I'd still have a working drill.
I mean, you could remove the entire battery. It'd no longer be a drill, but it would be a weird-shaped screwdriver.
But how far can I reduce its complexity and not ruin it? I don't want to take apart my drill, so let me move to another example. This mousetrap.
Okay, so he came to fame partly because of court cases where he was the expert witness on the intelligent design side and got absolutely demolished. And there's transcripts out there. What is it? Kurtzmiller v. Dover? Something like that. I'm not great with names. But the other thing is the mousetrap. He introduced this idea of irreducible complexity through the mousetrap on the principle that if you remove any part, it's no longer useful. So it has to all be there at once. And then he immediately got blasted by the entire internet showing how wrong that is. And he's still doing it, apparently. I guess that's sort of the moral of intelligent design, is whatever reality has to show you, ignore that in favor of your preferred conclusion.
The complexity of this machine entails 5 parts: the platform, the spring, the hammer, the holding bar, and the catch. Now, if I reduce the number of parts from 5 to 4, if I take away the holding bar, or the spring, or any other part, it wouldn't work. Every part is essential.
And that's sort of the key. That's how everyone made fun of him. Because in order to function as a mousetrap, every part is essential. But every single part functions perfectly well as the thing it is on its own. Behe's argument is this whole thing is pointless if you can't have all the things at the same time. Whereas from an evolutionary standpoint, you absolutely can develop all of the pieces independently, and once they're all there, then you can assemble them into a working mousetrap, but they do have valid functions completely on their own.
I call this irreducible complexity. So does this apply to biology too? Do we have examples of irreducible complexity in life?
Well, my dude, you don't even have an example in analogy form because it doesn't work for the mousetrap either.
Try this one. Here's a bacterium, a single-cell microbe.
I bet you a nickel he's going to go for the flagellum motor because he always does. It immediately follows the mousetrap.
Some bacteria have a flagellum, which is like an outboard motor on a boat.
No. What you see on screen, that device in the middle, that's like the motor. The flagellum itself is like the rotor, which is not the motor.
It rotates to propel bacteria through liquid, and it's necessary for their survival in order to swim to search for food.
Necessary, not really. It's definitely advantageous. It definitely increases their capabilities for survival because they can find more food faster and also get away from things that might want to eat them. Definite survival advantage, but necessary, I don't think so.
A flagellum has a number of parts: a drive shaft, a universal joint, a rotor, bushings, stator, even a clutch and braking system.
A clutch, you say? Obviously, we're making analogies to cars, which is probably why he started with cars.
The motor of the flagellum has been clocked at 100,000 revolutions per minute.
I'm not saying I don't believe him. I'm just really curious how exactly one gets that measurement.
And as with the mousetrap, removing even one component of this elegant machine destroys its function and renders the bacterium, shall we say, dead in the water.
Not true. Experiments have been done removing various parts, and you can get away with removing a lot of parts of that thing, and it'll still mostly function, or even partly function. Even if you remove the entire drive mechanism, you still have a flagellum. It's just no longer powered.
The flagellum is irreducibly complex.
The flagellar motor is not irreducibly complex.
Now we know that this was assembled in a factory, but how is the bacterial flagellum developed in nature? Keep in mind, the flagellum is irreducibly complex.
You saying the thing over and over does not make it any more true. Now, I don't know for certain, but one might suspect that many of the features in the motor assembly are repurposed proteins from other parts of the cell membrane or even cell wall, because this is a bacteria we're talking about, that performed other functions that were able to be adapted into their current role to facilitate the motion of the flagellum, which itself could have been developed from a number of different possibilities, either extensions of the cell wall in order to ward off predators or feel around or who knows what, extensions for various reasons. It could have been for the exchange of nutrients with other bacteria. Who's to say? But you've got an extension for some reason. You've got proteins that sometimes produce some kind of motion. You put them together in certain ways, and you get a little bit better motion. When you happen to wind them around the base of a flagellum, it spins. You make a few more adjustments, it spins faster. So on like this. Of course, it's all piecemeal and random, but that's how evolution works. If a thing happens to work out well, if a mutation happens to provide a benefit, then it immediately gets a survival advantage. It adapted. It performs better in its environment, and so it outcompetes every other alternative in fairly short order.
All the parts have to be in place, or it does not work.
It does not work as is.
Could it have been developed blindly, in stages? Let's say in the distant past, the bacteria first gained a drive shaft. Later on, a rotor. Then a stator, and then the rest. Then the parts got in sync as a high-performance engine. The theory of evolution tells us that given enough time, any organic structure we see today no matter how complex, could have slowly and fully developed by random, unguided forces.
Kind of true, but there's some language thrown in there to mislead. Random. Mutations are random, selection is not. So it's at best partly random.
We'll come back to the topic of complexity in our next video, which will examine the power of evolution.
Okay, cool. We're gonna delve into what Mike thinks evolution is all about in the next video. And this is a great place to leave this one. So let's do that. I like these. The cinematography is excellent. They're short and sweet. They're to the point, and they have lots to work with. So I dig them. We're probably going to do another one soon. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. A big thank you to our supporters on Patreon who helped me get this camera back online. If you want to make a difference, you can join them for as little as $3 a month and gain access to exclusive perks such as early and ad-free access to videos and more. And as always, remember, you don't have to pretend to not believe in the things that you scientifically know are true because you are better than religion.